excited that I almost, well, beat myself. So I'm sorry for that. But I hope to show you a little bit of the power of open source investigation, because I'm here on behalf of Bellingcat. Some of you may know Bellingcat, others don't. But in the coming 20 minutes, I'd like to show you two main case studies. And tomorrow, actually, I'm giving a workshop, and you'll be doing that stuff yourselves. But I called it the power of open source investigation, because we can talk a lot about the fake news, the post-truth era, alternative facts, and so on. But rather than focusing on these negative aspects, I'd like to focus on what is possible nowadays for anyone with an internet connection. So it's called digital open source investigation. Well, you can see this is when people talk about Bellingcat, they make these really nice drawings of people sitting like this behind laptops and computers, but I'm not even wearing a suit on stage, so usually I'm sitting in my boxer short behind my laptop, like last night, and working. But there are a lot of people doing these kind of digital open source investigations. And 3 years ago, a collective was found called Bellingcat to bring those people that are working on these kind of investigations together. So what we do is we use any kind of open source information that's available to investigate a lot of different things. You heard corruption, armed conflict, and so on. Ranging from, let's say, Myanmar to Ukraine, to Central African Republic, to the Netherlands. It really doesn't matter what we investigate, but we investigate a lot of different things. And we use only openly available information for those investigations. Obviously, like traditional media, but a lot of open source, freely available satellite imagery, like Google Maps, Yandex.Karti, Wikimapia, and of course a lot of social media. So Facebook, VK, YouTube, all known to you. I'm starting to get feeling old because there's Snapchat as well. A lot of people use it. I'm 26 and I have no idea how to use it, but I mean it's relevant because, for example, Syrian rebels filmed their offensive in Snapchat. So, because I have very little time, I only want to show two case studies in more detail. The first of them being the case related to the Malaysian Boeing, as you say, MH17. And the second one is the airstrike of a Pentagon airstrike on a mosque in Syria. So to start with MH17, I think it doesn't need a lot of introduction. It was departing from Schiphol Airport, was destined for Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, when it disappeared from the radar above eastern Ukraine. Now, there were a lot of claims what may have happened to the plane. You may have remembered there were claims that it was shot down by a fighter jet. There were claims that it was shot down by a ground-to-air missile launcher. But there were also even claims going really far that people in the Netherlands who lost, for example, family members, because there were 300 people on board and 200 of them were Dutch, that these were actors hired to just pretend that they lost family members, that the bodies were already placed on board. There are even theories, you can Google it, that MH3070, that was the other plane that disappeared above the sea, is actually MH17. So there are a lot of conspiracy theories about it, a lot of claims what may have happened. And online, people started looking, what can we find out? What can we establish as facts? Can we figure out more context about the airplane? And this turned out to be a very, very important photo, because it was posted online on VK, and was claiming to show a Buk anti-aircraft missile launch, as you can see here, on the deep loader of a truck. Now the question was, it was said to be taken in Torres, a town in eastern Ukraine. Now the question is, could we confirm where this photo was taken? And this is basically what we always do at Bellingcat. We try to confirm exact locations and then figure out more information. And in this case, we're always looking for the visual clues. And in this case, it's the name of a shop, Strooidom. So we start Googling, right? We start Googling Strooidom Torres, and it seems to be a wiki page with shops listed in Torres, including Magazine Strooidom. So we start Googling on that, and we found a document, which is not relevant for us. I think it was like a fight or something, it's 2010. Not relevant what the content is, but what it does, it mentions the name of the shop. And besides the name of the shop, it mentions the address. So the address we can just fill into Google Earth, and then we fly to the exact location. And we can start comparing what we see in the satellite image with what we see on the ground photo. And for example, we can see the building, we can see the shop, the other buildings, and thereby confirming the exact location. And then we try to look for more information. And as you know, many people, especially in former Soviet countries, they have the dash cams, right? You guys have dash cams in your cars, and you just drive around. And some people upload funny dash cam videos. But a lot of people actually upload dash cam videos where nothing happens, well, this is really useful information because for us it gives another perspective from the ground. For example, this guy who's driving around in Torres. And as you can see, on the left we have the building which we saw also in the picture, and on the right actually there is the shop. So we had more confirmation in this exact same location. And in that way we could tell people on the ground, for example journalists, to go to the location and to compare it. So here is an overlay of a video with the photo of the Bok launcher showing it's the exact same location. So in this way we were able to confirm, okay, there was a Buk missile launcher in separatist-held Torres in eastern Ukraine. But we also wanted to know at what time of the day was this picture taken, to get a better impression, when is this ongoing? Now you may know, I mean, hundreds and maybe even thousands of years ago, when we would like to have an idea of time, we would maybe stick a stick in the ground and see how the shadow changes over time, right? Now nowadays we have a very simple tool for that called Songcock. Once we have geolocated a picture, we can actually use the direction of the shadows to get a very rough estimate of, usually on the hour precise, time of the day. So in this way we were able to geolocate this Buk missile launcher in Torres, and we were able to give it time frame when it happened. But this is just one photo out of many pictures and videos uploaded of this same military convoy in eastern Ukraine. Here's another example where somebody tweeted already what he thought was the location. So we can see here the same deep loader, right? The truck with the Buk missile launcher on the back. So there were a lot of these kind of bits of information, which we all geolocated, which we always try to figure out the time. And in this way, we were able to map how a Buk missile launcher was transported through separatist-held Ukraine before MH17 was shot down. And after MH17 was shot down, we saw it traveling back to the Russian border with one missile missing. But at the same time, a lot of people online were trying to get a better impression. There is this whole misinformation campaign going on. So 4 days after MH17 was shot down, the Russian Ministry of Defense held a press conference. And they presented what they said was evidence regarding MH17. And they also presented two satellite images, allegedly showing a Ukrainian military base. As you can see here, this is the 14th, and this is the 17th. Now, what they were saying is that, look, on the 14th, there is a Buk missile launcher visible on satellite imagery of a Ukrainian military base. But on the 17th, that missile launcher is gone. Now, they weren't saying that Ukraine was directly responsible, but they were strongly implying that the Buk missile launcher may be the a Ukrainian military Buk. Now, I'd like to call this, well, let's call it the Colin Powell moment of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Remember Colin Powell when he was presenting satellite imagery on the eve before the Iraq war, allegedly showing evidence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction? At the time, what as a journalist should you do with those satellite images? How can you verify them? Nobody can access those bases in Iraq. Nobody has access to satellite imagery. But in 10 years' time, a lot has changed. And actually, we can access public imagery all the time. So we can actually fact-check those satellite images. And it's nothing else than spotted differences, as we did with a kid, right? Where you have a cartoon, you see a table, and there's something standing on it, and on the other picture, there's nothing standing on the table, and you circle what's wrong and what's right. We do the exact same thing with these Russian MOD pictures. For example, have a look at these trees here. So they say this is the 14th of July. If we go to open satellite imagery from Google Earth, we can go to the same spot, and we can see that on the 17th of July, there are no trees visible. Now you may say, okay, in 3 days' time, they have cut down those trees. It's possible. But if we look at all the open source imagery, the 2nd of July, the 17th of July, and the 21st of July, we can see that there were never any trees. So how on earth is it possible that on the 14th of July, the Russian Ministry of Defense suddenly has trees there? So in this way, in a very simple way, we're able to show, okay, they presented misdated satellite imagery as proof 4 days after this happened. So this is really interesting. So it only created more interest for us to investigate where the book was coming from. But we had one problem. This is footage from the Russian side of the border with Ukraine. And as you can see, there are many anti-aircraft missile systems and the supporting vehicles. So how could we be sure that we're actually tracing the right vehicle? So we came up with the idea to look for a unique fingerprint, and we would call it the side skirt fingerprint. Because those things you see above the wheels is like a rubber side skirt from the vehicle, and it damages along the way the vehicle is being used. And we figured that it's being damaged quite a lot, and we could compare We made a database of all the bug vehicles we spotted, both at the Ukrainian side of the border and at the Russian side of the border. So, for example, here we have a Ukrainian military book. And here we have other books we spotted. So we're just looking for that finger pattern, the fingerprint, as it were, and comparing them all with each other. And in this way, we were able to trace that book that was spotted in Ukraine back to Russia. We basically follow the digital footsteps of this missile launcher. And we can see June 24, June 23, it goes back in time. And eventually, the digital trace ended near Kursk in Russia. So we thought, okay, maybe there's an anti-aircraft missile brigade stationed in Kursk. So you type it into Google, turns out to be, yes, there is, the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade. You type it in social media. They have a social media page. They have a social media group. One of them was so kind to post an attendance list. So we could fill in the names on social media, and we find their social media profiles. And based on their social media profiles, they post pictures of the military convoys. And sometimes they were very kind to us, and we didn't even have to geolocate the picture because they would post in front of where they're crossing. So in this way, we collected way more information, and eventually we were able to uncover a lot of information that has also been useful for the joint investigative team, the Dutch police-led criminal investigation. And we were able to identify not only the commander who is eventually responsible for this book unit, but also the people who were responsible for this specific unit. Now, that is not to say that these guys, open source goes quite a long way. As you can see, it can cover a lot of information, but obviously we couldn't look in the vehicle. We don't know who pressed the button. We don't know whether these guys were actually in the vehicle when MH17 was shot down. But nevertheless, we are very confident that those guys, because they were responsible for this unit, they must know what happened to it. So I think this is a very strong case to show how both governmental misinformation or disinformation can be challenged by anyone with an internet connection. And by cooperating with each other, people can be held hopefully accountable. So that's about MH17. We talk about MH17 a lot. I can talk about it for hours, but I won't bother you with that because I also want to focus on a completely different case. Because often it seems everything is focused on Russia, and Russia is lying. I mean, yesterday they published a tweet saying US is supporting ISIS, and they published a video of a screenshot of a video game. I mean, it's sometimes so easy to debunk these Russian lies, but what is way more difficult for us is fact-checking my own government or the US government. And I want to show you how we went about this, because it's actually a very interesting case. Usually, when I start, like this morning, I sit in the toilet or I sit at breakfast and I start scrolling through social media to see, okay, what's being updated. Right now, there's a lot of things going on in Syria, but also Zimbabwe, you may have followed, Myanmar. And this is usually how it shows, right? These are the Syrian white helmets, and they claim a mosque has been bombed. So you have a lot of people on the ground that are claiming something has been bombed, and eventually people start saying Russia is responsible. So we can see how these claims are being copied in the international media. At least 42 dead in a Russian raid on Aleppo Mosque. So, okay, we have a claim. Well, if you would look at the MH17 presentation, well, it could be that Russia does it, right? But what we do is going back to the basis of journalism. Can we fact-check what's going on here? The claim is, first of all, Russia bombs a mosque in Syria. Can we fact-check whether Russia was responsible? Can we actually fact-check whether an airstrike took place? Can we fact-check what kind of building was bombed, if there was an airstrike? And can we fact-check where it happened? So what I do is basically looking at all the social media information from a location. And one thing was immediately very interesting. There was this picture of an alleged weapon remnant from the site. And if we start looking at it, what it shows, could it be a Russian missile? It would be a little bit strange if the text on a Russian missile is in Latin script and not in Cyrillic, right? So we started comparing what we saw here with, for example, a Hellfire missile of the United States. And if we would compare the labels, we could see, okay, there's kind of similarities between the labels, the font type, the black label. And eventually, the US actually admitted, a few hours later, that they were responsible for this airstrike. But what they said is, we didn't strike the mosque. So the interesting thing is that we started a very tough investigation into this. Not to say, oh, the US is right or the US is wrong, but to see who is speaking the truth here. What are the facts? Are the people on the ground speaking the truth that a mosque was bombed, or is the US speaking the truth that a mosque wasn't bombed? So this started a very large investigation. We started cooperating with two other organizations. One is called Forensic Architecture, a group of architects in London. And the other one is a human rights organization called Human Rights Watch. And we exchange information, and we start collecting open source information, making a timeline. And this became a very big investigation. I would like to show you a little bit. I will just continue talking. So for the technicians, maybe if it plays sound, then just switch it off. That'd be fantastic. But this shows the video Forensic Architecture made. And it really shows
on
how...
March 16th, 2017, at
the
around
sound is playing,
6:55
but
p.m.
is it possible to
a
switch the
US
sound off?
airstrike targeted Sayyidina Ahmed.
So basically here we geolocate first the place, right? Okay, we have the place of the mosque. We collect all this open source information, so there are videos, there are photos, all of it. There's a lot of information coming out of Syria, just like Ukraine, because a lot of people have smartphones. So we see, for example, here, a kid is being dragged out of the rubble. Then US came with this claim, right, as I told you. And interestingly, they actually said it happened in, they said we conducted an airstrike on Al-Qaeda in Syria, March 16, in Idlib, Syria. Now, interestingly, I geolocated it. It wasn't in Idlib, but in Aleppo province, so that was already a small mistake. But then they released this photo as well, and with more claims, and they deliberately said, this mosque you see at the left edge of the photo, we deliberately didn't strike that mosque. What we did strike is the building you see, which is destroyed, and it was a meeting hall. It wasn't a mosque, they said. So what we did is start to combine all this open source information and basically make a 3D model of all that information we have, just to get a better impression, how did this incident evolve in time and space? So you start collecting all that information, and you can basically paste it on the 3D model as puzzle pieces. So here we have a bomb crater, where we can zoom out again from the model, and we can see there's a very large crater. We can zoom out of the model again, and starting combining this, we can detect these two large bomb craters. Weapon experts said they were consistent with two 500-pound bombs, so very heavy ammunition. But we also found footage from before the airstrike, which is very important. Because a lot of people were saying, yeah, they're just, after the airstrike, they're just putting a Quran there, they're putting a sign of a mosque, and they say it's a mosque. So it's really important that we actually could discover footage from before the site, showing the adhan speaker used for the call to prayer, as well as a sign of the mosque, which says this is a Sayyid ibn Omar ibn al-Khattab mosque. Also, we can actually get a view from inside the building, using all this kind of open source information. So we can see the sign still standing next to the door after the bombardment. We can go inside the mosque, and we can actually discover a lot of features of how a mosque would look like. For example, the place to put the worshippers' shoes. We can go inside the main prayer hall, and in the background we see the mihrab, which is used to give the direction to Mecca, to the Kaaba in Mecca, direction of the prayers. So there were a lot of clues that this was actually not a meeting hall, but a very large and functioning mosque. So this investigation continued and continued. As you can see, puzzle pieces on the place, more rubble, and so on. So we also, Human Rights Watch and Forensic Architecture collected witness statements, so a traditional way of investigation, right? You interview people on the ground. And these witness statements could be corroborated with all the open source information we had. So eventually we could only reach one conclusion, all of us, the three groups. This is definitely a mosque, and the US struck a mosque. So we published 3 independent reports. An interesting thing is you can even see we make a blueprint out of the mosque and so on. There's a lot of information you can uncover. The interesting thing is that the US said, okay, good job that you did an investigation, but you don't have the intel, right? Like the intelligence that we have. Yeah, it's right. I'm not CIA, I'm not FSB, I don't have indeed the capabilities they have. So they said, you don't know, this wasn't a mosque. But they did start an internal investigation. So that was interesting. So we had all this evidence presented. We said it's clearly a mosque. The US said still, we are denying it. But then a few weeks later, they had a closed press conference. But my colleague was there, and he recorded the whole press conference, made a transcript out of it, and published it. It was by this guy, Bontrager. This is him. And the interesting thing is that he said, none of the buildings were annotated on our no-strike list as Category 1 facilities, which is a register of entities that must be carefully evaluated before approval to strike. So in this press conference, at least 15 times, they said they were wrong, and they actually did admit that the people that were conducting the strike weren't aware that they were striking a religious building. So this was really fascinating to us, not in the last place, to get some accountability for what actors are doing in war, but also it shows for me really the power of open source investigation. Anybody could have joined us investigating this stuff, and we were able to challenge one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, Ministry of Defense in the world, the Pentagon, and they had to admit they were wrong. This is just one example of thousands of airstrikes only happening in Syria and Iraq, not even talking of Yemen, not even talking of Libya. And you imagine, for all these cases, there's so much open source information available. And we can only investigate a few of them, but it's worth showing you the possibilities, because the more people that are engaged in this, the more people can actually hold actors accountable. I'm Dutch. These are the transparency levels of the actors involved, for example, in the coalition warfare in Iraq, led by the United States, and in Syria. As you can see, the Netherlands is one of the least transparent countries. That's why I find it so important to show this as well. Yeah, we can fact-check Russia, but we also need to fact-check our own governments. Well, having said that, I think I'm perhaps way over time. Oh, I see 49 seconds. I didn't tell you what Bellingcat, where the name comes from, but the name comes from belling the cat. And it's from an old Greek fable where you have a group of mice that is afraid of this very large and dangerous cat. And to outsmart the cat, somebody has an idea, and they said we should put a bell around the neck of the cat, because then each time the cat comes close, we're warned. Well, they say it's a great idea, but the only way by doing that is by cooperating. And I hope that in the past 20 minutes I've been able to show you how Bellingcat, as a group of mice together, through digital communication, with people in Russia, with people in Iraq, with people in anywhere, work together to try to bell the cat. Thank you for your listening.